Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining us and with us. Again, we're so thankful that she's here. Savannah Domenech is back talking about Kodak and all things Rochester. So, Savannah, how are you?
I am doing good today. How are you doing this fine day?
I'm doing great. The weather finally changed down here. So we went from 30s and low 40s up to the 70s and 80s. So that's exciting. It's
Wow,
very warm.
toasty.
I know. Finally. But we're not talking about the weather today. We are talking about Kodak. We are continuing our series in legacy environmental justice. And we've been talking through a lot of the things that go along with having a facility like Kodak in your city, right? The environmental issues, the health issues, some of the regulatory issues, lots of things going on. And today, we are going to talk about the economic aspects of having Kodak in your town, specifically jobs, right? Because that's what they sell us on. They tell us you bring this company, you bring this organization in, jobs, 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 and more jobs. And it lifts up the community. The people who live there will benefit from all of the economic activity that could take place when this company comes. And so when it comes to Kodak, can you help us understand what their impact was and what occurred economically, employment-wise, when Kodak was running high and strong in Rochester?
Definitely. So when Kodak was running high and strong in Rochester, more than 20% of jobs in the area were generated by Kodak, which is incredibly huge, especially considering that also Xerox was founded in Rochester, as well as Bausch and Lomb, and even also Paychex, the company that does payroll services, was founded in Rochester. And then all these jobs, even though, it's only 20% of, the total jobs in the area, a little bit more than that actually, we're looking at about half of the area's economic impact, which is still incredibly huge. So people knew of Kodak as this, should I say trustworthy organization. You can count on, your lifetime job there. A lot of people had 30 plus year jobs, which I find very interesting that it's not say 40 plus years. If it was 40 plus years, I'd probably be retiring at 60, 65. Instead of probably retiring, in fact, a little bit earlier than that, which is really, really nice. If you can do that. So I think it also goes to show that people were set up in a really good place that they could even retire early. Even earlier than that, what's it, 64 and a half for collecting your Social Security. I hope that is correct.
I'm sure we'll check on it. We'll check it.
Okay. But right, and then as a result, people saw Kodak as an opportunity to go straight from high school right to having a good paying job. And of course, I'm sure the parents are very proud of the children as well. Oh, look, you get your foot in the door, you don't mess anything up, and you have a job, a good solid job for the rest of your working life. And Kodak, put some employees through trade school. Kodak, had a trade in their own education processes, so you could learn trade at another school, go to Kodak, or you can just go to Kodak and then they give you on-job training, and you'll be good for doing a trade in film for your 30 years, and then you retire. So jobs at the peak of Kodak's operation was really, really good. I would say if you were white for a certain portion of the time. So at beginning in the late 60s, we start to see, the employee demographics of Kodak start to change. They start to allow more non-white workers in. The reason for this being is we also see that what is also occurring at this time, slightly beforehand, is, the civil rights movement. So Kodak was in fact impacted by this. Particularly there was in Rochester an organization. They were basically kind of came to the forefront of things. Maybe they solidified their connections with community, with employers and other community organizations. After there was race riots in Rochester in 1964. So after that, an organization is called FIGHT. So it stands for Freedom, Integration, God, Honor, Today. And their goal was essentially, to fight to ensure that, black residents of the city could get, good jobs at Kodak and other, facilities, which they did before, the late 1960s. Of course, it wasn't all white at Kodak, but it was predominantly after that we started to, grow. And I find this really interesting because the pollution from Kodak is continuing to happen, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s. And the thing is, like, who's, even though you may be living in the area, you're not working there, but you're still receiving the pollution. It's not like suddenly, beginning in the 1960s, like the first black residents moved into Rochester, they had been living there for many, many years prior, being impacted by the pollution. Yet there was really not many jobs for them, which goes to show that sometimes the company might be coming in, especially in environmental situations where you're being promised the jobs, the community is being promised the jobs, but only certain groups of people are being offered the jobs. Maybe people who are of a certain, demographic, or who, live a certain distance far away from the city, so they're not, seeing the day-to-day impacts of their job. But in Rochester, we see people, we do see more integration following the 1960s, but people are still being heavily impacted by the pollution, even though they don't necessarily get all the benefits from Kodak. And even,
Hmm.
I would say, even after the late 1960s, where Kodak started to do a bit of a better job of integration, we don't see that Kodak is, cleansed of its racial and oppressive history. For example, in 1996, Kodak finally came to a agreement with both, black workers and also female workers as well. And they said that, okay, we're going to pay you guys more and pay you guys in back wages, because essentially they were not paying these two groups what they should have been paying them, especially compared to, the white male counterparts. They were not giving
Hmm.
them the promotions they deserve. You might think, oh, 1996, everything's fixed, everything's, all disparities are, pretty much taken care of, they're not there anymore. But then, in 2009, we see actually two different class action lawsuits are finally, settled. One came from 2004, the other came from 2007, and Kodak agreed to pay $21.8 million to basically these groups of black workers who said, hey, we are not being paid the same as our white counterparts, and we're being neglected for these promotions as well. So we also see, unfortunately, in Kodak's history, also racism as well. However, as you
Hmm.
know, pollution does not care what, color your skin is. It just cares where you live, and then you get polluted that way. And we know that also a lot of people, especially after, due to white flight and things like that, that people who are living around Kodak tend to, be non-white. And yet here
Hmm.
they are still suffering from the vast majority of the pollution, yet they're not being, employed fairly, and they're not being paid fairly either.
That is interesting. So we got to talk about that a little bit more. The first thing I want to bring up is the idea that when Kodak comes, as it grows, as it becomes one of the biggest employers in Rochester, it is not actually employing the people who live near the facility most impacted. Because in a lot of discussions, that's usually what people assume will take place. If you live close, if you're nearby, you would be kind of first in line to be able to work and benefit from them being there. But that doesn't seem to be the case, at least early on when Kodak was running and running well. And so that is really, I guess it's not shocking, but it still surprises me that even with all of that, the racism, the sexism prevails, and the employment workforce still remains very homogenous. As far as those riots go, how much do you know about those riots? Like, was there a lot of tension in Rochester, the city? Was it just kind of spillover from other parts of the country? Everybody's kind of rising up and demanding their rights. What do you know about what was going on during that time in Rochester when these riots took place?
From my understanding, what was going on with these riots took place is people assumed that everything was, all well and good in Rochester, and then people essentially joining the large and being like, no, not all is well and good. Our, our white city council members, not everything is well and good, and we want you to listen to us.
Mhm.
About like 100 to 200 people took place in these riots. They weren't like like, burn down the buildings or anything, but they got people's attention. And
Mhm.
it was also a lot of community work that happened. So it's more like, I would say like the explosion of like anger that we have been mistreated for so long. But it's also like,
Mhm.
we also understand that like screaming at your face for hours and years and won't get anything. We want to have, agreements. And it's a Kodak came to an agreement with them. At first, it actually wasn't honored all that well. And then they tried
Mhm.
again. And then this project started to be happening on the employment work front. To be honest, I do not know like all the details about like who was involved, because looking at historical newspapers, oftentimes they're biased upon what they report. And so
Yeah.
like I'm looking at like, the local Democratic Chronicles, the local newspaper. Um, there's not oodles of stuff on it. In addition, also, unfortunately, this is like 60 years ago. Some things have
Mhm.
been lost to time because there wasn't digital papers back then. Just some stories have, now been digitalized today.
Mhm.
So I wish I could give more like information about like who, like what exactly their motives were, what they wanted exactly. We know some of what they wanted. They wanted integration. They wanted, better opportunities for their children. They wanted more access to jobs, better like
Mhm.
equal rights. Essentially, we know this, but like we don't know all the details, which is I think really really sad and a testament to like more historical work needs to be done. But I don't want to like be on this podcast giving out wrong information either.
Yeah, no, don't do that. No, we don't need that at all. I appreciate that. Um, Obviously, we know about the civil rights movement in the 60s. The Civil Rights Act gets passed, voting rights gets passed, fair housing gets passed. Lots of things happen to kind of shift the ways in which minorities, women, other marginalized communities are being treated. But even still, from that point in the 60s to 1996 and then 2009, which is not that long ago, they're still paying out these settlements. They're still dealing with lawsuits. They're still dealing with this legacy, not just of environmental injustice, but racial injustice and gender inequality and all these different things. And then they go bankrupt. And so when they go bankrupt, what does that do? Because I would imagine people are suing and people are trying to get restitution because they know that Kodak's going to be here for a while. We want to get ourselves in the right position to be able to have these opportunities. Because when they go bankrupt, is all that lost now? Is everything that we've been fighting for and working towards in this community no longer available? What happens to the people once Kodak is no longer functioning operationally in the city?
Yeah. So the good news is those who got those class action lawsuits ruled in favor of them. They still got their money, but the
Okay.
issue is because this it was paid out pretty much, my understanding, kind of like at one time. Essentially, it wasn't like here's a million here, here's a million there. So that is the good news. The issue
Mhm.
is though, you lost your job probably 3 years later, and now you're on the search for a new job. And then also just like Kodak had done a lot of agreements with like especially like ex-retirees, people who used to work there, that that they would be essentially provided for life. You did your service, now here's your benefit kind of thing. And they said,
Mhm.
healthcare benefits, you get your pensions. All that was just basically ripped away from everybody, saying we are not legally, the judge has not ruled that we have to pay out these pensions. In fact, the judge said the exact opposite. They said, please actually cancel it because this is too much for your bankruptcy court. You guys gotta like shed some money somewhere. So please like actually suggested getting rid of the pensions. And Kodak I would say perhaps happily obliged, saying, oh, we can shave off all these millions of dollars. And that's what they did. Obviously for class action lawsuit, the judge has ruled you're gonna pay it. So they did. And we see also like retirees, okay, maybe I retired from Kodak, say 10 years ago. I did my 30 years of service. And now I'm like, well, maybe you didn't have, one of those, savings accounts or one of those retirement accounts. Now, what do you have to do? You got to go back to work. And then the issue is oftentimes you are employed in film. Kodak was the big, really only film game in town. So now your skills essentially are not, being catered to. You might need to get new skills. And actually, any time that like any organization goes bankrupt, there's a huge concern about unemployment, of course, but then also
Mhm.
like concerns regarding like standards of living. Because if you don't have money, maybe you can't afford to, pay your rent, pay your child support bills, food, upkeep, and then that could lead to like, degradation, which is unfortunate. And then you could be like forced out of your home, evicted. You could lose your mortgage because you no longer have these like concrete money coming in, and that's really a
Mhm.
concern anytime that we see any organization that is so far reaching as Kodak was when they go bankrupt. Like the academic term is like deindustrialization. So a lot of that's been happening around the United States as we, shift more manufacturing either to overseas or things are going out of, going bankrupt.
Mhm.
But it's the thing that who is suffering. The company obviously, suffers itself when it goes bankrupt, but the lasting impact is on people, and often these people, we live in a capitalist society. You need money to, survive, and these people now need to go find another job. And oftentimes, I mean, if you already worked 30 years, we can make some assumptions about you that you're over the hill, as they say. You're over 50. Um, and as a result, sometimes it can be hard to pick up a new skill. And
Mhm.
especially like there's also like unfortunately like age discrimination as well, being like, well, you want to retire anyway, so why would I hire you, kind of thing.
That's right.
Um, and it's an unfortunate thing that these jobs and these people were suffering as a result of Kodak's bankruptcy because those promises of pensions and health care insurance vanished.
Wow. So Kodak goes bankrupt. Obviously, you lose your job. But if you were already retired and you already had an agreement, you lost that pension. And so now you have no income whatsoever coming in. All you've ever done was work at Kodak. All the skills that you've gained were from Kodak, presumably to work for Kodak, not for anyone else. And so you could have these potential retirees in their 60s and 70s back on the job market trying to get a new skill, get a new job, and convince someone to hire them to work for them even after they've retired after working for 40, 30, 40 years at Kodak. I mean, that is just a horrible situation to be in. And I can't imagine what that competition is like when you're back in school, when you're back in the classroom, when you're trying to interview with a potential employer and you're 68, and we all know that you're coming out of retirement because Kodak went out of business and cut your pension. And so, what kind of, well, are there any services, any kind of programs or organizations or, any infrastructure in place to help people who dealt with Kodak and their bankruptcy and their job loss and their pension loss recover and move forward, or they everybody just on their own?
There definitely is infrastructure out there. So for example, when my mom got laid off, she wasn't from Kodak, but it was around a similar time as when Kodak went bankrupt. She, she heard about this organization from a friend it's called like Rochester Works. It's funded by the county, some private organizations as well, and they do different things like how to make a resume, skills training, such as that. There's of course other services that are not free. I mean, you can probably go online and find lots of like pay me like thousands of dollars and I'll make you like the prettiest resume ever. I'll teach you, your personal branding, that sort of thing. But the thing is,
Mhm.
like, when your funding's just been cut, you really can't be affording often to, be shelling out the 1K to like help you get your next job. You need free services. And the thing is, Rochester
Mhm.
does have them, and I think that's great. The issue is, I would say they're very well like perhaps hidden they're hidden gems in the sense that like you have to know that it's there and you have to know that it's looking about like the only reason my mom knew about it is because one of her other coworkers happened to find out about it. And don't get me
Mhm.
wrong, word of mouth is very like powerful, but like you don't like see like advertisements on the TV or anything, so you just have to like know it's called this. You have to like go to this website. It's a government website, of course. It's very, very confusing looking often, and you have to know what services you're looking for. And sometimes if you're coming out of retirement, you may not know exactly what you need. Um,
Mhm.
so maybe like, oh, okay, a resume. Well, what exactly should my resume have on it? How much detail should I give? Or even things as simple as like, well, do I need to, build me a LinkedIn or something? Do I need to do these other job searching things?
Mhm.
What about different, employment portals? Well, should I be on Indeed? Should I be on Monster? Should I be on ZipRecruiter? Should I be on, insert recruiter website here? And I think people also need to know sometimes the saying, you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't know exactly what you need, it can be hard to get the help that you need. I think if you get your foot in the door, it's very helpful for these services can help you. But it's also
Mhm.
keep in mind a lot of these services offer their services during the workday. So when you're taking advantage of these services, you can't be, say, perhaps interviewing for another job during the workday. So there are, balances as well. It is nice that it's during the workday because, say, if maybe you have a kid and your kid's going to school, you can do it then. But it's often it depends. So I would say yes, but the advertising could be a bit better, I would argue.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, you gotta get the word out. People have to know about it, engage the service. They need to be supported financially. All those things are important. Um, One last question for you before we wrap up this discussion. A lot of industries, especially very large ones, usually when they come into town, they're coming in, they provide these services, they provide these goods, and you have support industries around them, right? So they supply material to that big industry for the industry to function, and people get work off of that industry, right? We call it the industrial complex, where all of these different companies are coming because the big company benefits from having them around to provide the things that they need to function well. And then that kind of creates an even larger scale economy within that city. I wonder if when Kodak went, did anybody else have to go with them as far as going bankrupt and not being able to support themselves because they were here for Kodak? Or was Kodak kind of a singular entity and once it was bankrupt, that was that?
So, because one thing about Kodak, it was very much like a soup to nuts kind of situation. So they did a lot of their own building. So of course there are suppliers as well that obviously would have suffered from the loss of Kodak. But these suppliers, I would argue, knew about Kodak's demise coming. So they had also found other suppliers as well. So it's not like when Kodak left, I would say we lost this other like giant manufacturer or this giant other supplier as well that was like reliant on Kodak's being present. I would say maybe some of them decreased in like their importance in the community, but I wouldn't
Mhm.
say that they, vanished all around.
Okay. Okay. So, and then when Kodak, okay, I guess another question. When Kodak left because they went bankrupt, are you aware of any major changes to the way the city functioned beyond the rising employment, right? So did Kodak fund a lot of things that the city did that they no longer could do anymore because they were relying on Kodak for the money? Were there certain attractions or certain types of, entertainment venues or restaurant parts of the town that relied on a lot of the business that came from Kodak that struggled when they went bankrupt? Did the city change a lot when that happened, or were we just trying to move forward and get these people working again?
I would say the city did change in a sense that some areas became less important, and then we also see that like when you lose your job, some areas fall into repair like disrepair, and then we see that these areas unfortunately become labeled as like the bad neighborhood essentially, and now these quote unquote bad neighborhoods are now trying to be gentrified by these new and upcoming sources. Kodak also had a big part to play in the arts. Their Kodak Center is actually still running. I'm not sure
Hmm.
where that is funding from, but you still have your major artists that go there for shows. And for example, um, some schools' graduations even happen to occur there. So it is still running, but it's not as great as it used to be. In addition, just like the area around Kodak, there used to be more restaurants, more shops, and now it's more like roads and stuff like that. And it's just like there's just less economic activity. Everything now is beginning to like sprawl out. It's kind of like the center has died to let us like continue to spread outwards.
Mm-hmm.
And then regarding scholarships, especially for like college students, a lot of those scholarships were Kodak funded scholarships. It helps some students get through college or through technical school. Some of them, in a sense, still kind of do exist. You got like people who are like still funding them, like individual donors, because that scholarship made such an impact on their life, so they want to give back, sort of thing. But unfortunately, a lot of that funding went away, and that's also very sad considering that a lot of these workers are only the retirees, they were only trained in film. They want to go back into like a more skilled trade. They have to get more education, and
Mm-hmm.
education costs money. So it means that the skills is also people kind of being hammered down from numerous ways. They need this skills training, but maybe it's less affordable than it could have been because Kodak is no longer willing to like even like give a few $1,000s in some places.
Oh man. Okay, I was wondering about that. So it seems like, and it's clear to me, at least from this conversation, that Kodak worked really hard to be a big part of the community, and it actually became that to such a degree that once it went bankrupt, so much of the community, so much of Rochester as a city had to make some major adjustments to deal with their departure. And so it's just another, lesson for us, right? It's another way of understanding what it looks like to be so tied to an industry, so tied to a very particular organization, and what it can look like when that organization no longer is present. We see the same thing in the auto industry. I'm wondering even if the tech industry will see some of this soon, when some of these larger corporations, larger entities maybe start shifting their operations, start doing things differently, how would that affect those towns that they're in, that people were so excited to have them present? What will that do? And so this was a very good conversation. I'm really glad you were able to share so much about what Kodak did in the community, what happened when they went bankrupt, and what the residents did to recover from all of that. It's been very good. Is there anything else we need to know? Anything at all? Tell me.
I would just say like the thing is like even though Kodak left a giant gaping hole, human innovation is there. There are startups, there are tech ventures, and the city
Mhm.
is economically diversifying, I would say. And there is still light in that city. I know oftentimes you might think the city's dead, it's beyond cause, but no, it's not. There is still life in that city. There is still people who we should be caring about their potentials and their futures. We need to be, supporting these people how we possibly can be supporting them, and whether that be, even helping the youth. It doesn't need to necessarily be like, oh, only the Kodak former retirees. No, there's a generational cycle here that we also need to be aware of. We need to,
Mhm.
be helping the younger generation who one day they'll be born after, the bankruptcy of Kodak, making sure that they, get their high school diplomas, their GEDs, that there's, flexible degree options for them, and that's the route they want to go, and that they can have skills that aren't just honed into one industry, but that can be broadly applied to a variety of different trades and industries and potential futures for them. So not putting all their, cards in one basket essentially.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's well said. It's well said. So, Savannah, thank you so much for this insight. Thank you for this history lesson and for giving us a bigger, broader understanding of what the economics look like when this kind of facility comes and settles into your city. So I really, really appreciate it. I know the listeners appreciate it. Thank you so much for being with us on this episode today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for being here. And that is another episode of the Environmental Justice Lab, where we are for the people and for the planet. We will see you next time.